So, let's begin the story. And hey, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button already. Don't act like you're too cool for spooky stories, okay? This story begins on a cold and lonely night in London. A girl named Kat was heading home after a wild party. As she stepped outside, trying to find a cab, the streets were completely deserted. No cars, no people, just her bad life choices, and the regret of wearing heels. With no ride in sight, she decided to catch the last metro. At the ticket counter, she ran into a strange-looking girl, holding a dog in her lap. They exchanged a faint smile. You know, that awkward I'm polite but don't talk to me smile. And then Kat went down to the platform to wait for the train. After a while, the exhaustion from the party started catching up to her, and she dozed off on a bench. When she woke up, the station was completely empty. No trains, no staff, even the gates upstairs were locked tight. To make it worse, her phone had no signal. Because of course it didn't. Horror movie logic 101. Slowly, panic started creeping in. She ran around hoping to hear a human voice, or at least find a vending machine that worked. Suddenly she heard the sound of another train approaching. She sprinted toward the platform and managed to hop into the last compartment. But what she didn't know was, she wasn't alone in that train. Classic mistake number 1, Kat. Never get into a mysterious train after midnight. After a few minutes the train suddenly stopped. Kat nervously made her way to the driver's cabin and knocked on the door. No response. Then, all of a sudden, the lights went out. From the far end of the train, she noticed a faint flashlight beam slowly moving toward her. She assumed it must be a staff member, but as the light came closer, it was Craig, her co-worker. Turns out Craig had been hiding there just to scare her. Call Craig, because nothing says funny prank like giving someone a heart attack in a moving train. But the joke took a dark turn. Craig's behavior suddenly changed. He tried to get close to her, even forcing himself on her. Right then the back door of the train burst open, and some unseen force dragged Kat into the darkness. Terrified, she somehow made it back to the station and tried to call for help. But her coins were all used up. Apparently she thought she was in 1998, with that payphone move. The whole place was silent again. Then suddenly, she heard a door creak open. When she peeked through, she saw that same girl's dog standing there, just staring, like it was saying, "Yeah, you shouldn't have come here, genius." The dog ran off into a maintenance tunnel, and summoning all her courage, Kat followed it. Inside she saw 2 figures. One of them was the same girl from the ticket counter. Deeper inside the tunnel, Kat met 2 more people, a girl named Mandy, and her boyfriend Jimmy. Because nothing says romantic date night like hanging out in a haunted subway tunnel. Kat, her voice trembling, told them she was trapped down there. She said some psycho was after her, and one of her co-workers had already gone missing. She begged the 2 of them, "Please, somehow get me out of here." Jimmy explained that at night, there were no guards at the station, only one security officer who stayed in the control room. But he also mentioned that both he and Mandy were homeless, which is why they never really talked to the officer. Yeah, because hey, I live in your basement isn't exactly a great conversation starter. Jimmy told Kat, "You should rest here for the night. The doors will unlock automatically in the morning." But Kat was terrified. She pulled out £50 from her pocket and said, "If you take me to the control room, the money's yours." Nothing motivates bravery like a broke man smelling cash. Tempted by the offer, Jimmy immediately agreed. On their way, he started telling Kat how many homeless people used to live in the tunnels before, but in the past few months, they'd started disappearing one by one. People said someone, or something, came at night and dragged them away. But no one cared, because to society, these people were already invisible. Yeah, apparently the government's slogan down there was out of sight, out of empathy. Meanwhile, Mandy was alone. She started hearing faint noises echoing through the tunnels. She thought maybe Jimmy had come back. But when she opened the door, there were only rats scurrying everywhere. "Congratulations, Mandy. You've officially opened the door to every girl's nightmare. Rats, darkness and regret. Suddenly, her dog lunged at them and ran off. Mandy chased after him, but then she saw something that made her pee her pants. Honestly, at that point, who wouldn't? Even the rats probably screamed. Back to Jimmy and Kat. They had finally reached the control room. Then they heard a strange scraping sound nearby. When they looked carefully, they saw Kat's co-worker, the one who had gone missing earlier, lying badly injured on the tracks. Kat begged Jimmy, please, help him. But Jimmy snapped, forget him. The guy who tried to assault you doesn't deserve saving, let him die here. For once, Jimmy had a solid moral compass, even if it was duct taped together with street logic. But Kat refused to leave him behind. Eventually Jimmy sighed and helped her pull Craig up. Craig's whole body was wounded, his clothes soaked in blood. Suddenly the dog came running back, but this time, its fur was covered in blood. Jimmy immediately realized something horrible had happened. He bolted back toward their shelter, his survival instincts kicking in faster than his brain. When he got there, he saw blood trails smeared all over the floor. Mandy was gone. The bloody tracks led him to an old, dark tunnel, and it was clear that Mandy had vanished. Meanwhile, Kat laid Craig down in a corner and started looking for help. That's when she spotted an emergency phone. As soon as she pressed the button, she heard the voice of a security guard on the other end. Finally, someone picks up, after the entire population of London apparently decided to take the night off. Kat told the guard that she was trapped inside the station, and that she wasn't alone. There was an injured man with her, and some killer was lurking around, hunting them. But the guard didn't take her seriously. In fact, he thought she was just another homeless woman making up stories for attention. On his monitor, he couldn't even see any injured man. He said, "Let me check first. If it's true, I'll call an ambulance." Yeah, because nothing says emergency response like a guy who wants to double-check murder claims during his coffee break. Desperate, Kat dragged Craig's limp body in front of the camera. But by then, Craig had already stopped breathing. She screamed, "Look, he's dead! Please just get me out of here!" Finally, the guard gave in. He said, "All right, stay right there, I'm coming." But as soon as he stepped out of the security room, a dark shadow appeared, and in an instant it slit the guard's throat. Well, there goes the only guy on payroll actually doing his job, for the first and last time. Meanwhile, Kat heard the faint sound of his screams echoing through the tunnel. She instantly realized that death was now breathing down her neck. Without a second thought, she ran, straight toward Jimmy's hideout. When she arrived, she saw fresh bloodstains on the floor, and let's just say her bladder immediately filed for early retirement. She stepped forward cautiously, and saw Jimmy sitting silently in a corner. Kat told him the security guard was dead, and that they had to take the tunnel to the next station. Maybe another officer there could help. But Jimmy didn't say a word. He just muttered quietly, "Put on your shoes. Take this flashlight, the carrier tracks are live. One wrong step and you're toast." Finally, the man who's been living underground suddenly remembers how electricity works. Bravo, Einstein. He picked up his dog, cradled it in his arms, and they started walking through the dark tunnel together. Moments later they heard the rumbling sound of an approaching train. Both of them quickly ducked into a narrow alcove on the side of the wall, as the train screeched to a halt in front of them. Kat panicked, thinking the killer had returned. But Jimmy said, "Relax. A train passes through here every night. Maybe this is our way out." He decided to go check it out, to see if there was a driver. "If there's a driver," he told her, "I'll call you. If it's the killer, I'll stay quiet." Yeah, because nothing screams great plan like playing peekaboo with a murderer. Kat tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. He handed her the dog and moved ahead alone. Now Kat was completely alone. She cautiously followed behind, but the path ended abruptly. In front of her was just a slippery glass slide, with water flowing downward. She stood there, completely confused, not knowing where to go next. Meanwhile, Jimmy had climbed inside the train. He shouted, "Hello, anyone here?" But there was only silence. Then he saw the security guard's dead body lying on the floor. Suddenly the train began to vibrate slightly, and from behind, he heard Kat's terrified scream. He turned around and the next second, he collapsed to the ground. And that's when Jimmy realized, curiosity doesn't just kill cats, it kills Jimmy's too. When Kat reached Jimmy, his breathing had already stopped. Panicking, she bolted down the tunnel until she stumbled upon the slippery glass path. She tried to climb up, but the ground was covered in mud and crawling with rats. Her foot slipped and she fell straight into a water tank. The tank was swarming with dozens of rats, all swimming like it was their private pool party. Great! She escaped a killer just to join Ratatouille, the sewer edition. Ah! Somehow she managed to drag herself out and head toward a rusty iron ladder. Just as she started climbing, a glassy shape rose from the water below. Terrified, she screamed her lungs out, scrambling to the top like her life depended on it. Which, to be fair, it did. When she reached the upper level, she realized she was inside some kind of warehouse. Suddenly the lights went out. She turned on her flashlight, nervously scanning the room for anyone alive, and then, with a loud bang, the door slammed shut behind her. Kat froze in fear, turned off her flashlight, and even held her breath while hiding in a corner. Because obviously killers can't see you if you pretend to be a decorative lamp. But what she didn't know was that the thing she feared most was already there, lurking in the darkness, like it owned the place. When the next scene fades in, Kat wakes up, unconscious no more, but locked inside what looked like a water cell. Next to her was another prisoner, an old man named George. That's when she saw the killer. He was dragging the dead body of the security guard into the room, like some twisted janitor finishing his shift. After he left, Kat noticed the water cages were all connected to each other. If she could swim across to the next chamber, she might escape. George whispered that he didn't know how to swim. Of course, because every horror movie needs that one guy who can't do the only thing that can save them. But Kat refused to give up. She took a deep breath, plunged into the water, and started swimming. Suddenly, the shadow returned. George realized that if he didn't stay completely still, they'd both be caught, so he lay quietly, trying to act dead. The shadow examined him closely and leaned in. George stayed frozen. But when the creature suddenly lunged at him, George panicked and screamed, "Nice going, George, because yelling during a stealth mission always works out great." That single scream sealed his fate. But right then, Kat managed to pull herself out of the water. She grabbed a high-heeled shoe lying nearby, and with a primal yell, jammed it straight into the monster's eye. Some people use heels for fashion. Kat uses them for revenge and retinal damage. The beast collapsed, giving her the perfect chance to free George. The two ran as fast as they could until they stumbled into an old operating room. What Kat saw inside froze her blood. The room was lined with glass jars, each containing the preserved remains of children from some horrific experiment. Broken baby cribs and shattered instruments littered the floor. Then she saw another room through a window. Someone was lying on a table, motionless. It was Mandy. Kat turned to George and said, "Go check if she's still alive." Trembling, George walked closer and gently touched her foot. He turned to Kat, his voice shaking, and said, "She's gone. Rip Mandy, you survived a creepy tunnel, a psycho killer, and a mutant rat spa, only to end up as a table decoration." Kat broke down, crying uncontrollably. George held her and said, "We have to get out of here somehow, no matter what." Suddenly, Mandy's fingers and neck twitched slightly, but neither of them noticed. They tried to open the door, but it was welded shut. Then Kat spotted a crack in the wall that seemed to lead to another tunnel. George started breaking the bricks, and the two of them crawled inside. But just as they slipped through, the shadow leapt down behind them. It didn't chase after them. Instead, it moved toward Mandy. The figure pulled on an old surgical coat and slipped rusty gloves onto its hands, like some deranged doctor about to perform the world's worst surgery. Mandy begged for mercy. But the next second, her screams echoed through the entire tunnel. "Congratulations, Mandy. Your comeback lasted about 5 seconds. Shortest horror revival arc ever." Then, out of nowhere, that shadow appeared behind George and grabbed him. George slammed it to the ground and started beating the hell out of it, finally proving that old men in horror movies can fight back. Kat picked up a metal rod, ready to finish the monster once and for all. But then, the creature suddenly whimpered, "Please, don't hurt me, I'll do anything." Kat froze. Because apparently serial killers saying please makes them trustworthy now. But the moment the monster started repeating Jimmy's name over and over, Kat lost her mind. She swung the rod with full force, but the creature dodged and jammed its filthy fingers straight into George's eyes. Yeah, that's definitely not the kind of eye contact anyone asked for. Kat screamed and ran for her life, with the killer chasing close behind. Then she spotted an elevator shaft room ahead. Without thinking twice, she grabbed an iron chain from the wall and lured the killer toward the train tracks. At the perfect moment, a train roared in, and the monster was obliterated on impact. Talk about express delivery to hell. Kat collapsed beside the wall, gasping and trembling. Just then, Jimmy's dog came running back to her, the only loyal creature left in this whole nightmare. Moments later, a few people entered the station. One man looked at Kat's miserable condition and handed her some money. As she stared at the cash, her eyes filled with tears. Now she looked exactly like a homeless woman herself, broken, lost, and forgotten. And with that, the chilling tale of the creepy tunnel killer finally came to an end. Moral of the story: never miss the last metro, or you might end up in a horror movie sponsored by bad luck and questionable decisions.